Journalists matter. Yet they are too often threatened and abused just for doing their jobs. Insulted and harassed online and off, bullied to propagate falsehoods by people with a vested interest, taken to court to stop their legitimate investigations, imprisoned, tortured, killed. And it's getting worse. We need to protect journalists. Not just because they deserve and need the freedom to do their work, but because if we don't, we're not protecting democracy. The campaign for the safety of journalists is a chance for real change. Building on the Council of Europe's solid foundation of protecting human rights and safeguarding democracy, it is the sign of a real commitment by member states to act urgently to address the issue in an effective way. It will work with every part of society to create an environment that respects the role journalists play in democracy and allows them to work without hindrance. It will bring together media organizations, media owners, policymakers, law enforcement, civil society, everyone involved, making sure that efforts to protect journalists are effectively carried out and that the standards that exist already are properly put into practice. If we want a world where democracy thrives, if we want a world where freedom of expression is respected and where falsehoods are exposed, if we want to make fully informed choices in our lives, then we need to protect journalists and stop the attacks. Journalists matter. Let's make sure they can work in safety.
Indeed. Good morning and a warm welcome to Riga, Latvia, and greetings from somewhat rainy Riga to those following the conference live streaming this morning. Welcome to the conference, The Pen is Mightier Than the Sword, Meeting the Challenges to Freedom of Expression and the Safety of Journalists, co-organised by the Council of Europe and the Presidency of Latvia to the Council of Europe, namely the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Culture, and the Ombudsman of Latvia. My name is Jodie Ginsberg, President of the Committee to Protect Journalists.
And I'm Nicholas Karidis, Director of the Institute for Mass Media in Cyprus. And for the next 2 days, we will be the conference's co-moderators. You will have noticed that the first part of the title of this conference is not a statement, it is a question. A question which did not come up in the third decade of the 21st century, a time when we had hoped to be living in a world with full respect for democratic values, observance of the rule of law, and protection of human rights. Instead, we find ourselves on a continent facing unprecedented challenges, where the sword is still being used instead of the pen, and often against the pen. But here we are, in this magnificent venue, in this place of slow and profound contemplation. We must ourselves contemplate how to safeguard journalists, journalism, freedom of expression, democracy itself.
Media freedom and the safety of journalists, including in the digital environment, are long-standing priorities for Latvia and the Council of Europe. And so therefore, this conference fits nicely within the programme of the Latvian Presidency to the Committee of Ministers. The objective of this conference is in line with this aim: to strengthen freedom of expression and the safety of journalists. Today's conference will launch the Council of Europe's campaign for the safety of journalists, which will, I very much hope, set the path for a series of decisive activities aimed at effectively increasing the safety of journalists and other media actors. And as we saw in the video, we need that action and decisive action like never before. The campaign aims to intensify the efforts of the Council of Europe member states to safeguard journalist safety and to raise awareness about their vital role for the functioning of democracy.
We both hope the conference and the launch of the campaign will provide a long-sought forum to hear and exchange views, experiences and best practices with a wide range of experts in the field, including high-level national and international organizations and representatives, journalists and civil society organizations, academia and legal professionals.
The list of participating experts, civil society organizations, scholars, journalists, political dignitaries and officials could not have been richer. And the challenges we address could not have been more serious nor more immediate. I suspect Nicholas will agree with me in this, as we both come from the non-profit civil society world, where we're generally a little bit more informal at our own gatherings, which generates a communal spirit and engaging debate, and we'd really like to bring some of that here to make our debate productive and meaningful, of course, respecting the formalities deserving of states and international institutions.
The conference is being streamed live and participants will be in listen-only mode. At this moment, I'd like to make a point that relates to the flow of the conference. Out of respect to the actors and director and the substance of the play that we will be watching later on, may I please ask you to return later on after the opening remarks to the auditorium at 10:25 sharp. Now, we will begin with our opening remarks, followed by our keynote speaker. I'd like to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Krišjānis Garnić. He is also the President of the Council of Ministers Committee of the Council of Europe.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here today. If the two of you come from the non-governmental side, I suppose I come very much from the governmental side of things. If you are less formal, it's enjoyable. I'll try to be also not quite so formal. So first, of course, it's a great pleasure to kick off the Council of Europe's campaign for the safety of journalism here in Riga. Our country's history, not so distant history, has not always been one where we could gather in a place such as this and talk about democratic values and how important they are. Our country experienced 50 years of occupation, Soviet, Nazi, Soviet, in that very unpleasant order, and regained our independence just over 30 years ago. And in this 30 years' time, and that's not a lifespan. So most people in our country very much remember what life was in that system and what life is like in the system we currently enjoy. We speak of, I say, three basic values that as liberal democracies we live by. We have freedom, we have democracy, and we have the rule of law. And all of these things, they're something that many of us give lip service to. But I think it's really worth considering, especially in light of the topic today, the safety of journalism, and the role of journalism in upholding our basic values. Now, as a politician, I've been a politician more than 20 years, and I've had various postings and responsibilities, and I have often been the object of journalistic inquiry. And I can say that it's not always extremely pleasant, the questions that you get, the explanations you have to give. But actually, it is a complete prerequisite, because without that, that fourth or fifth power of journalism, that is what holds any democracy in check, because democratically elected leaders have to be able to answer questions that the press has to be allowed to pose. And that may sound trivial, but it's not. It's actually, the way I see, the very fundamental of how any democracy can work. Consider where we are here in Riga. Not so many hundreds of kilometers away, our neighbor Belarus, or our other neighbor Russia. The situation is radically different. Journalism there has been oppressed together with political opposition. Journalists have been killed, detained, have fled. And also in Riga, we host a number of journalistic houses, I suppose, that are emigre currently, giving information back into Russia, into Belarus, without the constraints, the political constraints that are faced there. So journalism is, when we think about democracies, then we think, well, we have the police forces, we have the armed forces if necessary, we have plebiscites and we have elections, and the people have their say every 4 or 5 years, depending upon the political cycle, of re-electing or electing different representatives. But throughout this entire cycle on a daily basis, it's journalism as such which is the bulwark, the guardian of democracy. And there's an especially big challenge today regarding disinformation. So 20 years ago, before the widespread use of the internet, social media, if I wanted to get a message out, I had to have lots of money. I would have to buy billboards or radio or television, and I would have to be very well organized, very well funded. Today, anyone with a smartphone, which is literally anyone in the world, can start to lay claims to being an information provider. So I am an unedited journalist. And so we have information, we have factual information, and we have massive amounts of disinformation. And who is the body that can help to disentangle the truth from falsehoods? Well, again, it is the world of journalism, which has that responsibility also to highlight what out there is actually false and what is not false. And it becomes more blurry because fewer and fewer people seem to consume edited journalism, right? Many people get their news from Facebook or Twitter or whatever it's called now, X, or Instagram, or all the other applications my children use, and I'm getting too gray to keep up. But if people are not consuming or reading edited journalism, then how can edited journalism get into the fray? And in a way, you have to step down to get into the fray, but you have to do that as well. So, the video reminds us of physical danger to journalism. Of course, this is a top priority. But then there is the political protection of journalism that makes sure, and we have to have laws in place that do not allow politicians, in spite of all of what we sometimes wish, to actually meddle in journalistic activities. And then there is it's more, I suppose, a responsibility, and I would say a challenge of journalism, of edited and serious journalism, to get into the fray of the disinformation and to address that. Because all of these forces, there are many forces in the world which are assailing democracies. And it's not a given democracy, if we look on a worldwide scale, is stepping back. There are fewer and fewer countries that are democracies, not more and more, as was the case maybe some 30 years ago, where democracy seemed to be blooming, especially with the fall of the Iron Curtain. Now democracy is stepping back, and there are a number of countries, maybe not so far away from Latvia, which are on the European side, where actually the rule of law is coming under question. Are all of the democracies that still have elections actually fully functioning as democracies? And is the press freedom really there? So as a politician, it's maybe not correct that I simply pose a bunch of questions and hope someone else will answer. But I think the issues that you'll be talking about over the next couple of days are absolutely crucial in ensuring that democracy can continue to thrive, not only in the face of, say, blatant military aggression, as the case of Russia and Ukraine, but also in the face of disinformation in the social media age or era that we are well in the midst of, and all of the other powers that often want to use democratic form to attain autocratic ends. And the last bastion and the first bastion for that is journalism, and therefore the safety and the protection of journalists at all levels is absolutely key. And our country's presidency in the Council of Europe, we think this is one of the most fundamental issues. It comes from our history and our understanding of where we are and why we are. But it is truly important to address these issues head-on, publicly, to make sure that democracy wins and the other powers lose. It is that simple. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I know you're not able to stay for the full conference, so we hope to have some answers for you at the end of 2 days. I'd now like to invite Agnes Logina, Minister of Culture of the Republic of Latvia, to give some opening remarks.
The safety of journalists is in really clear correlation with the safety of democracy. And in the last few years, Europe and the world has seen shocking cases of violence and even murders that are aimed at intimidating journalists. And our professionals are also being faced with campaigns of disinformation, with intimidation, with the radicalization of political discourse. Our duty is to stand against these threats and this disinformation. Our duty is to not forget those who have paid the highest price in the name of the truth. Our duty is to support those who, in order to tell the truth, who sacrifice their comfort, their safety, sometimes even their lives. As we have chosen to live in a diverse and democratic society, we have to support those professions and those people who help us to maintain this type of society, because it is not a given. Thank you for your work. Thank you to the European Council for this campaign, and enjoy your conference day. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Logina, for the simultaneous translation, very efficient and appreciated. Thank you. I now invite Hanne Juncker, Director of Information Society and Action Against Crime, Directorate General for Human Rights and Rule of Law, Council of Europe, to give her opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Minister, Excellencies, partners and colleagues. I would like to start by thanking the Government of Latvia for co-organizing this very timely conference with the Council of Europe on a topic that is critical and crucial for our democracies and for each of us today. And thank you also for hosting the launch of the first Council of Europe campaign on the safety of journalists. I think the fact that we will be spending 2 days discussing the challenges currently faced in the areas of freedom of expression within the House of Books is very appropriate and very symbolic. The European Court of Human Rights has emphasized in its case law in Article 10 on the right to freedom of expression that states are required to establish effective mechanisms for the protection of authors and journalists. They must do this in order to create a favorable environment for the informed participation in public debate of all, enabling all of us to freely receive and impart information and express opinions and ideas without fear. I think the Foreign Minister put it very well just now. Journalists play an essential role as watchdogs in a democratic society, where the task of the media in imparting information and ideas on all matters of public interest is connected to the public's right to receive those ideas and that information. And for these reasons, public watchdogs and the press in particular enjoy increased protection under Article 10. Infringing the right to impart and receive information can have far-reaching and detrimental effects on societies, including limiting democratic processes, stifling innovation, fostering censorship, and potentially leading to social and political instability. The crucial importance of the role of journalism and the media, and ultimately of individual journalists, in times of crisis and conflict has been acknowledged by many. There seems to be agreement that new venues must be explored to protect them, and that our old strategies need to be reinforced. Preserving freedom of expression and freedom of the media has never been easy, but in recent years, the threats we encounter have really been exceptional. In February last year, the war of aggression by the Russian Federation against Ukraine upended our most deeply held values and created the ongoing tragedy and violation of international law that we are still witnessing now, and it is heartbreaking on every level. It has also had profound implications for journalists who wish to cover what is happening. Mass disinformation campaigns proliferate, and information is weaponized, as we see in the title of our conference, with a view to manipulating public opinion, gaining political influence, and exacerbating social tensions. While focusing on outstanding challenges, especially those posed by war and crisis, we should not forget that throughout Europe, even not necessarily in times of crisis, and I quote now, journalists and other media actors are increasingly being threatened, harassed, subjected to surveillance, intimidated, arbitrarily deprived of their liberty, physically attacked, tortured, and even killed because of their investigative work, opinions, or reporting. That long list comes from the opening paragraph of the recommendation adopted by the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe in 2016 on the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists and other media actors. Already then, the Council of Europe member states agreed that the situation was alarming and unacceptable. And the situation has not improved in the intervening years. The European media environment and individual journalists continue to be under pressure. This has been confirmed by consecutive annual reports by the Secretary-General of the Council of Europe on the state of democracy, human rights and the rule of law in Europe, and also annual reports by the Council of Europe platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists. The data presented in the last reform of the platform, published in March of this year, it was entitled War in Europe and the Fight for the Right to Report. It highlights a startling increase in attacks and threats against journalists. And the very idea of the Journalists Matter campaign that we are launching today arises from this pressing need to fight such a climate of pressure and violence against journalists. The concerns are long-standing, and they impact directly journalists seeking to do their job of gathering and sharing information without fearing for their jobs or their lives. But these concerns of pressure and violence have much broader implications as well, for the right to be informed, for trust in institutions, and when it comes to accountability for human rights violations and other wrongdoing that could and should be exposed. We do have standards on these issues, as well as guidelines and tools. Some are global, some have been developed by the Council of Europe. They tend to be both specific and targeted, but their effective implementation clearly still remains insufficient, and we have ample confirmation of that from the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. So action is needed to fill this gap, to increase the safety of journalists through meaningful action, and the action is really needed right now. A renewed commitment to take such action and to make this issue an urgent political priority, notably through a comprehensive campaign, was formally taken by the Member States' ministers responsible for media and information society at the ministerial conference that took place in Cyprus in 2021. And we also had this year the fourth summit of the Council of Europe Heads of State and Government in Reykjavik in May, and they reiterated their commitment that free, independent, plural and diverse media and journalists and other media workers should be afforded full protection under the law. The campaign's ultimate ambition is to address those concerns. The campaign aims to achieve a tangible improvement in the domestic legal and policy frameworks for the safety of journalists and their implementation, so that solid and effective safeguards are in place in law and in practice for journalists to fulfill their mission freely and safely. Throughout the campaign, Member States are going to be encouraged to take practical steps to transpose the campaign to their national context by organizing national chapters of the campaign. The main aim is for Member States to gradually adopt or better implement their own national action plans and strategies in this field, and to put in place effective mechanisms for the protection of journalists. The Council of Europe looks forward to facilitating and supporting these efforts. There are already remarkable examples of working initiatives established at the national level, which we will take and draw on and build on and use as inspiration. States have been invited to designate national focal points as well as national committees to ensure coordination at both the national and European level, and those who have not yet gone ahead with that are encouraged to do so. A first meeting of the national focal points for the campaign will take place tomorrow, in fact, and details regarding the aim and the roadmap and the methodology for the campaign are going to be presented later this morning. I've spoken for a long time, but I'd like to make just a few concluding remarks. The closing event of this campaign will be in 2027. We will consider that we have succeeded in the combined action of the campaign's efforts, and if the combined action of the campaign's efforts will have resulted in satisfactory changes to the applicable national laws and policies, and if this has been followed by effective implementation. If public awareness has grown, and if greater pan-European solidarity on this issue can be observed. We should be measured on whether we then see an environment where journalists can do their jobs freely and safely, without fear and without self-restraint. I would underline, it always goes without saying, but the effective, active involvement of all relevant stakeholders in the campaign will be decisive. State authorities, national parliaments, media outlets, journalists themselves, obviously, civil society, international organizations, these and many others are all called upon to play a role. Some of the most important stakeholders who are able to make a difference are sitting with us in this room. So I invite you to take this opportunity to take ownership of the campaign and to support its effective development in the years to come. Finally, I wish to thank again the Latvian authorities and the Latvian ambassador to the Council of Europe, not only for their deep commitment to the issues, but for having paved the way by offering already a financial contribution to the campaign. And we would hope that perhaps this could be the first of others to come. And with that, I wish us an excellent conference, and thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Juncker. We were due this morning to have Dunja Mijatovic, the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, deliver this morning's keynote speech. Unfortunately, Dunja was taken ill yesterday. I understand she is recovering, but we all wish her well. I know she is a friend to very many in this room. So we won't have Dunja this morning, but we're all thinking of her. In her place, Mr. Stefano Montari, Head of Communications for the Commissioner's Office, will be delivering her remarks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And yes, unfortunately, the Commissioner is ill, and she deeply regrets the fact that she couldn't travel. And apparently this is the first time it happened, so it is a really tough moment for her. So she asked me to deliver the speech that she prepared on her behalf. Dear Minister, dear ambassadors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as we shine a spotlight on the need to strengthen safety of journalists today, I warmly welcome and support the launch of the campaign of the Council of Europe, because this is a critical situation today. The timeliness of the campaign cannot be overstated. Europe is one of the best continents in terms of press freedom. We have a robust framework supporting media freedom, including the case law of the court that has been mentioned, and several standards like the Committee of Ministers' recommendations. Still, during my tenure, I witnessed a worrying decline in the safety of journalists in many European countries. Physical violence is the most evident symptom. From the tragic murders of investigative journalists to attacks on media houses, the threat to life and the safety of journalists, all these remain serious concerns. The conflict in Ukraine has exacerbated the problem, with journalists risking their lives to expose and report on human rights abuses and war crimes. Tragically, several have been killed. We all know the names of other journalists who have been killed in the line of duty in Europe. The list would be too long to mention one by one, although they would deserve this honor. But threats also take other forms, from intimidation and reprisals to police violence during demonstrations, searches of journalists' premises. Numerous journalists across our continent face legal threats, including defamation charges, misuse of anti-terror laws, and other forms of judicial harassment. One of the most insidious threats is what we call SLAPs, the strategic lawsuits against public participation. These coercive tactics, which abuse the legal system, are used by powerful individuals, corporations, public entities sometimes, to silence critical voices. SLAPs are not necessarily aiming at winning a case in court. They aim at bankrupting, intimidating, and silencing critical voices. In addition, impunity for crimes against journalists remains a serious problem in several of our member states. Investigations drag on for years, and the perpetrators often escape justice. This failure of state authorities to fulfill their obligation to conduct effective investigations undermines public confidence in state institutions and encourages further attacks on journalists. This dire situation has serious consequences for democracy itself, as we have already heard. When the press is silenced, democracy withers. The time to act is now. State authorities should turn words into action and uphold the human rights standards that they have adopted to ensure safety of journalists. International organizations, in particular the Council of Europe, have played a key role in setting standards and monitoring the implementation. Now, member states must redouble their commitment to these standards and ensure that violations are met with adequate consequences. Among the main priorities, the first one is to end impunity for crimes against journalists. Media freedom cannot thrive if perpetrators go unpunished, because this invites further violence against journalists. Those responsible for the crimes against journalists must be swiftly and effectively investigated. Preventing and punishing violence against journalists is equally important. While safety cannot be guaranteed in every situation, government authorities can take steps to minimize all the risks. This includes working with journalists, their employers, trade unions, and associations. States should support these bodies and recognize their role in upholding democracy and human rights. Another pressing concern is to ensure that threatened journalists are protected. Authorities are often aware of the threats against them, but fail to act. Police and law enforcement agencies need to improve their response to these threats against journalists, and politicians should actively condemn violence and any act of threats against journalists. Women journalists, who are increasingly targeted with misogynistic language and violence, require special attention too. The mental health and well-being of journalists and their families should also be an integral part of any strategy to strengthen media freedom and the safety of journalists. Policing of demonstrations need to be improved to ensure that journalists can report safely and freely without fear of arrest or police violence. For this to happen, law enforcement officials should be trained to work with journalists at public gatherings, In addition, the adoption of legislation to combat SLAPs, while preserving the plaintiff's access to justice, should tip the balance in favor of media freedom. The forthcoming Council of Europe recommendation on combating SLAPs has the potential to be a game changer in Europe and set a global standard. Therefore, I invite member states to use this recommendation as the minimum standard to inform their legislation and practice to counter SLAPs. It is also important to protect and support independent journalists who have been forced into exile due to oppressive conditions in their countries. These journalists are vital defenders of democratic values and of human rights, and they deserve support and recognition for their essential work. Crucial allies in the defense of media freedom and safety are national human rights institutions, the Ombudsman, who is also a partner of this conference, and other national human rights institutions and commissions. They monitor compliance with international standards and principles and hold governments and public authorities to account. One example of this is the annual report, Rule of Law, put together by members of the European Network of National Human Rights Institutions, which includes information on media freedom and SLAPs and their relationship with the rule of law. Some national human rights structures have the power of legislative initiative, meaning that they are enabled to present legislation or amendments, or they can challenge laws to strengthen compliance with international human rights standards, therefore including media freedom. For this reason, states should ensure that these institutions are truly independent, well-resourced, and can work effectively to discharge their human rights mandate. All these objectives are achievable with political will that recognizes the interrelation between the threats that media is facing and the threats that our democratic fabric is facing. This requires a comprehensive approach that not only focuses on protecting journalists, but also addresses the broader societal and legal issues that contribute to the challenges to the media. Two structural issues require the attention of member states. First, the marked decline of the rule of law in several countries has weakened the independence of the judiciary and restricted media freedom. Without robust checks and balances, including an independent judiciary and democratic parliamentary oversight, even the best legislation and policy cannot protect the media. Second, it is essential to address the growing polarization in society. State authorities must refrain from fueling divisions and distrust in the media. Treating journalists as fair game exacerbates social divisions and fosters a dangerous distrust of the media. This worrying trend that I have observed in several member states has significant implications to democracy. Mistrust of the media can lead citizens to turn to partisan or unreliable sources and spread misinformation or disinformation. Negative portrayals of media professionals can also lead to self-censorship and threats to physical violence. Therefore, public authorities should foster a climate of dialogue with the media, recognizing their role as a vital one for the health of a democracy. Dear Minister, ladies and gentlemen, reaching the conclusion of my intervention, I would like to recall the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the alma mater of all human rights standards, which reads, "Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. And the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. This aspiration is still relevant today, and media freedom and safety is integral to its realization. Thank you.